conversation today could shift something in your life in a way you didn't see coming. Not a dramatic confrontation, not a life-altering argument, just a conversation. A simple exchange of words with someone. Maybe someone you know well, maybe someone you haven't spoken to in a while, maybe even someone you've only just met. And something about what gets said, or how it gets said, or what it makes you realize mid-sentence changes the direction of something. Quietly. Almost without you noticing it happening in real time. If that sounds like a stretch, stay with me. Because today, March 11th, 2026, there's a very specific astrological shift happening that makes exactly this kind of moment not only possible, but genuinely likely. And once I explain what's going on and why today's energy is so different from the past few days, I think a lot of what you're already sensing this morning is going to click into place. Today, the moon moves into Gemini. And I want to talk about what that actually means. Not in abstract astrological terms, but in the kind of real, practical, this is what you might actually notice way that makes a difference to how you move through your day. Let me give you the astrological context first, and then we'll spend most of our time on what this might actually look like in your life right now. The moon shifts into a new zodiac sign roughly every 2.5 days. Each sign it passes through changes the emotional atmosphere of the day, what people feel pulled toward, how they process things, what kinds of interactions tend to happen naturally versus what feels forced or heavy. When the moon is moving through Scorpio or Pisces, the days feel deep and introspective, sometimes emotionally loaded. When it's in Taurus or Capricorn, there's a grounded, slower quality. People want to build things, stabilize things, stay practical. But when the moon enters Gemini, the whole tone of the day shifts into something faster, lighter, and above all, more communicative. Gemini is an air sign and it's ruled by Mercury, the planet of language, thought, information, and the movement of ideas between people. When the moon, which governs our emotional instincts and our intuitive responses, lands in Mercury's home sign, something interesting happens. Your feelings start looking for words. Your instincts push you toward connection. The things you've been thinking quietly to yourself start wanting to be said out loud, and the conversations you've been putting off, or the ones you never expected to have, start finding their way to you anyway. That's what makes today worth paying attention to. Now let's talk about what this actually looks like in real life, because the energy of a Gemini moon is not subtle once you know what you're looking for. Think about the last few weeks. For a lot of people, the past stretch of time has had a heavier, more inward quality. Things have been moving slowly. Decisions have been sitting in a kind of gray zone, not fully made, not fully abandoned. Conversations have been half started and then left unfinished. There's been a sense of processing, waiting, sitting with things that don't yet have resolution. If that sounds familiar, it's not unusual. The astrological weather leading into today had that kind of reflective, underwater quality that makes it hard to move quickly or communicate clearly. Today is different. The fog lifts a little. And what tends to happen when that fog lifts under a Gemini moon is that communication starts moving again, sometimes in ways that catch you off guard. Here's a scenario I want you to sit with for a moment. You're going about your day. Maybe you're at work. Maybe you're running errands. Maybe you're just having a regular morning. And someone says something to you. Could be a colleague, a friend, a family member, and it's not necessarily a profound statement. It might even seem casual on the surface, but something about it lands differently than you expected. It answers a question you didn't know you were asking. It opens a door you hadn't noticed was closed, or it simply says the thing you've been needing to hear from outside your own head. This is the kind of moment Gemini moon days are famous for, not grand revelations, but small, precise moments of verbal clarity that shift the way you're looking at something. And the reason they happen more on days like today is that under Gemini's influence, people communicate more openly, more curiously, more honestly. The usual social filters come down a little. People say what they actually think, and when people say what they actually think, sometimes it lands exactly where it needed to. So pay attention today to what people say to you, not just the big conversations, the small ones too. The passing comment, the quick check-in that goes longer than either of you expected, the message you almost didn't open. Today, those small exchanges carry more weight than they normally would. Now let me talk about the other side of this. The conversations you initiate, rather than the ones that come to you. There is almost certainly something you've been meaning to say to someone, something that's been sitting in your chest for days or weeks, something you've drafted in your head 100 times, but never actually sent or spoken. Maybe it's a professional thing. Feedback you want to give, a question you've been hesitant to ask, a proposal you've been almost ready to put forward. Maybe it's personal. Something you want to say to a friend, a family member, a partner, someone you felt a growing distance from without being entirely sure how it happened. Under a Gemini moon, the words come more easily. The right framing, the natural opening line, the tone that feels honest without being heavy. All of that flows more naturally today than it has in recent days. This doesn't mean the conversation will be easy, necessarily, but the act of starting it, of finding the first sentence, of picking up the phone or sitting down to write the email, that part tends to feel less daunting today. The energy supports expression. It lowers the internal barrier between thought and speech. And sometimes that barrier is the only thing that's been standing between you and a conversation that actually needed to happen. If something comes to mind right now, a person, a message, a conversation you've been circling around, notice that. That pull is worth following today. I also want to talk about something that tends to happen with information on Gemini moon days, because this is genuinely different from other days, and a lot of people notice it. Information moves fast under Gemini, not just in the sense that things get communicated quickly, but in the sense that the right piece of information tends to arrive at the right time. You might hear something today that connects two things you've been separately thinking about for weeks. You might read something, an article, a message, a comment from someone that answers a question you've been sitting with. You might be in a conversation about one thing and suddenly realize, mid-exchange, that what's being said applies directly to something completely different in your life. Gemini is the sign of connections, of seeing how things relate to each other, of drawing lines between separate dots and recognizing a pattern. Under a Gemini moon, your mind does this more readily than usual. You're sharper, more alert to subtext, more able to hear what's being communicated beneath the surface of what's being said. And that heightened receptivity means that the information flowing toward you today has a better chance of actually being absorbed and used rather than passing through unnoticed. So keep your attention open today. Read the messages that come in rather than leaving them for later. Have the impromptu conversation rather than saying, "You'll follow up next week." Ask the question that's been sitting in the back of your mind rather than talking yourself out of it. Today, information is moving, and the people who are paying attention are the ones who will catch what matters. Let me shift to relationships for a moment, because the Gemini moon has something specific to say here that I think is going to resonate with a lot of people. Gemini governs the exchange between people, the back and forth, the curiosity we feel toward each other, the way a good conversation can make you feel genuinely connected to someone in a way that transcends whatever the conversation was actually about. Under today's moon, that quality of connection is heightened. Conversations feel more alive. There's more genuine curiosity in how people engage with each other. The usual social formalities thin out a little, and something more real tends to come through. What this means practically is that if there's a relationship in your life that has been feeling distant or stuck, a friendship that's drifted, a connection that lost its energy somewhere along the way, a dynamic with someone where communication has become surface level or routine, today might be the day something shifts. Not because Gemini forces reconciliation, But because the emotional atmosphere today is more conducive to real conversation than it's been recently. And sometimes all a relationship needs to breathe again is one honest exchange. One conversation where both people actually say what they mean and actually listen to the response. Think about someone in your life you've been meaning to reach out to, someone you think about occasionally and then get distracted before you actually send the message. Today's energy is nudging you toward that person. Not to have a heavy conversation necessarily. Sometimes it's just a simple, "Hey, I was thinking about you. How are you actually doing?" And sometimes that simple message is the one that opens something back up. And here's something I've noticed again and again when it comes to Gemini moon energy and relationships. It has a way of surfacing people. You'll be going about your day and suddenly think clearly and specifically about someone you haven't been in contact with for months. Or you'll mention someone's name in a conversation, and then hours later, that person texts you out of nowhere. It sounds like coincidence. Maybe it is. But on days when the moon is in Gemini and Mercury's energy is high and the whole atmosphere of the day is oriented toward connection and communication, these kinds of synchronicities tend to cluster. The human network becomes more active. People reach out on impulse. Old threads get picked back up. If someone comes to mind today, someone specific, someone you feel a pull toward, that's worth paying attention to. Gemini moon days reward the people who act on those small intuitive nudges rather than filing them away for later. Later, in this case, often means never. Today, it could mean something meaningful. There's also something worth mentioning for the people who are navigating more complex relationship situations right now. People who are in the middle of something uncertain, who have been unsure how to address something, who have been waiting for the right moment to bring something up. The right moment has a way of appearing on days like this, not because everything will be resolved in one conversation, but because the first real conversation, the one where things are actually named and actually addressed, can start happening today in a way that felt impossible last week. Let's talk about work for a moment, because today's energy is significant there too. If you're in a field that involves any kind of communication, and most fields do, in some form, today is one of those days where you're likely to feel noticeably sharper, more articulate, more able to express a complex idea simply, more confident in the language you reach for when you're trying to explain something or persuade someone or just be understood. This matters practically. A well-expressed idea in a meeting today could land differently than the same idea would have on a slower day. An email you've been agonizing over might come together quickly and feel right in a way it hasn't before. A conversation with a manager, a client, a collaborator, one where you've been unsure how to approach something, might open up more naturally than you expected. There's also the matter of news that may be coming your way professionally. Gemini moon days tend to get things moving in the information pipeline. Things that have been sitting. A decision someone's been deliberating, feedback on something you submitted, a response to a message you sent weeks ago, often start moving on days when Mercury's energy is active. So if you've been waiting on something professionally, stay available and stay alert today, not with anxiety, just with awareness. The communication channel is open. And I want to say something specific to the people who have an idea they've been sitting on, a business idea, a creative project, a proposal, a plan for something they want to build or start or change. Under a Gemini moon, the mental architecture for those kinds of ideas tends to become clearer. You can see the outline of something more distinctly. The pieces that were floating separately start arranging themselves into something that looks more like a plan. And more importantly, the urge to share it, to test it by saying it out loud to someone you trust, tends to become stronger. There's something important about that urge. When an idea is only inside your head, it stays theoretical. It stays safe and abstract and impossible to truly evaluate. But the moment you say it out loud, the moment you describe it to someone and hear yourself explain it and watch how another person receives it, something real happens. You find out if it holds up. You hear which parts sound solid and which parts you're still uncertain about. You get a question from someone that points you toward something you hadn't considered. Or you get a reaction that confirms something you already sensed but needed to see reflected back. Today is a good day to say the idea out loud to someone, even informally, even just as I've been thinking about something. Tell me what you think. That conversation might be one of the ones that shifts something. I also want to speak to the people who are at a crossroads right now, not just in work, but in the larger sense. The people who have been sitting with a question about their life that doesn't have an obvious answer. Do I stay in this or do I move on? Is this what I actually want or is it just what I've always done? Am I building towards something real or just going through the motions? These are questions that can feel impossibly heavy when you're sitting alone with them. But under a Gemini moon, there's a quality to thinking that's more analytical than emotional, more detached in a useful way. You can look at your situation with a slightly wider lens today, less caught up in the feeling of it and more able to actually see it clearly. And that clarity, when it comes, often arrives not through deep deliberation, but through a sudden recognition. A moment in conversation where you hear yourself say something and realize, oh, that's actually what I think. That's actually where I stand. Pay attention to those moments today. The things you say out loud that surprise you a little. The opinions that come out of your mouth that feel more definite than you expected. Those moments of unexpected self-clarity are one of Gemini Moon's most underrated gifts. There's also something worth mentioning about the way Gemini Moon handles indecision. Most of us, when we're stuck on a decision, try to think our way out of it alone, going over the same variables, the same pros and cons, the same fears and hopes, until we're exhausted and no closer to an answer. What Gemini Moon suggests is a different approach. Talk it through. Not to get someone else to make the decision for you, but because the act of articulating something to another person forces a kind of clarity that internal rumination simply cannot produce. When you have to explain your situation to someone who doesn't already know the backstory, you have to organize your thoughts. You have to identify what actually matters. You have to hear yourself say the thing you've been afraid to fully admit. And sometimes, in the middle of explaining something to someone else, you hear yourself say the answer, quietly, buried inside a longer sentence. And you stop and think, oh, that's it. That's what I actually need to do. That is a very Gemini Moon kind of moment. And today, those moments are available. There's one more thing I want to address before we close, and it's for the people who are in a quieter period right now. A waiting period, a transition, a phase where not much seems to be happening on the surface, even though something is clearly shifting underneath. The past several weeks have had an energy that has kept a lot of people in their own heads, processing quietly, moving slowly, feeling like they're preparing for something without quite knowing what. And that kind of phase is necessary. It has real value. But it can start to feel isolating after a while. Like the world is moving and you've somehow gotten left behind. Like other people's lives are progressing and yours is standing still. Today's Gemini Moon is a genuine break in that pattern. Not the end of the transition, but a window. A day where the internal processing can start finding external expression, where the things you've been figuring out quietly can begin to take form as words, as conversations, as questions asked and ideas shared, and where the connection to other people, which tends to be the thing that moves things forward faster than almost anything else, can be restored a little. Because here's what's actually true. Most of the things that change our lives don't happen in solitude. They happen in conversation. A mentor who says the one thing that reframes everything. A friend who mentions an opportunity they thought of you for. A stranger who asks a question that makes you think differently about your own answer. A partner who says something honest that breaks through a weeks-long stalemate. The words of another person, landing at the right moment, have a way of doing what hours of private thinking cannot. Because here's what's actually true. Most of the things that change our lives don't happen in solitude. They happen in conversation. A mentor who says the one thing that reframes everything. A friend who mentions an opportunity they thought of you for. A stranger who asks a question that makes you think differently about your own answer. A partner who says something honest that breaks through a weeks-long stalemate. The words of another person, landing at the right moment, have a way of doing what hours of private thinking cannot. I want to sit with that idea for a moment because I think it's one of the most underappreciated truths about how change actually works in people's lives. We tend to imagine transformation as something that happens inside, a private process of reflection and growth that eventually results in a new version of ourselves stepping out into the world. And while that inner process is real and important, it rarely works in isolation. Almost every significant shift I've ever heard people describe, the moment they finally decided to leave something, or finally committed to something, or finally understood something about themselves that had been blurry for years. Almost all of those moments had a conversation in them somewhere. Something someone said. Something they finally said back. A question that landed at exactly the right angle. Today, the atmosphere is full of those potential moments. The moon in Gemini isn't promising you a life-changing conversation, but it is creating the conditions in which that kind of exchange becomes far more likely than it would be on an ordinary day. The air is, quite literally, more communicative right now, more alive with the movement of ideas and feelings looking for expression. And the people around you, whether they know it or not, are more open to honest exchange today than they've been in a while. So bring your real self to your conversations today. Not the version of you that's performing fine. Not the version that's being careful and measured and saying what seems appropriate. The version that actually has something to say. The version that has been thinking about something, sitting with something, trying to figure something out. Let that version of you show up today, even partially, even in one conversation, and see what comes back. Today is a day rich with those moments. And whether you're the one speaking or the one listening, whether you initiate something or something finds its way to you, stay open to what gets said. Stay curious about who shows up and why. Let conversations go a little longer than they normally would. Ask the follow-up question. Share the thought you almost kept to yourself. Because a conversation today could shift something in your life in a way you didn't see coming. And the most remarkable part about that is how ordinary the moment might look when it happens. No fanfare, no announcement, just words, exchanged between people, carrying exactly the weight they were meant to carry. If something like that happens for you today, a message, a conversation, a moment of unexpected clarity that came from something someone said, I'd genuinely love to hear about it. Drop it in the comments. Tell me what shifted, what was said, what you finally said back. These stories are always the most interesting ones to read, and I think you'll find that other people's experiences today resonate more than you'd expect. If you're new here and this kind of grounded, real-life take on astrology speaks to you, consider subscribing. I post regularly around astrological shifts that are actually happening right now. Not distant predictions, but energy that's moving through people's lives today. And I always try to keep it practical, honest, and focused on what you might actually experience. Thank you for being here today. Pay attention to your conversations. Say the thing, ask the question, and I'll see you in the next one.